is Wenceslao, a teaching artist for Alliance of California Traditional Arts and muralist for the past 15 years. A mural is defined as any piece of artwork that is painted or applied directly to a wall. But to a muralist, murals are much more than that. Murals can inspire beauty, spark creativity in the lives of individuals, as well as educate and empower people in disenfranchised communities. I sat with three cultural workers, Rabbi Lynn Gottlieb, Joe Galarza, and Dr. Garcia, artists from different backgrounds that share a common practice, community-based mural arts. These interviews give us a closer look at ways mural art is utilized for cultural preservation and a better understanding why this type of work is needed worldwide.
Ya, la, 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 la. Ya, la, 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 la. Ya, la, la, la. My name is Lynn Gottlieb. I'm a rabbi, storyteller, community organizer, peace activist, cultural guardian with Jewish culture and tradition. My medium is storytelling, percussion, and mostly acrylics on canvas. My mother was a puppeteer and made her own puppets and puppet stage, and so she taught art. So I kind of grew up both in theater and creating environments with art. So those are part of my heritage and legacy. We, have always had this tradition of having a very rich cultural life. And so I always had an immediate arena in which to create with a community. And so that also has always impacted me because as a rabbi, which is a very creative life, it's always done in cooperation and mutual cooperation with a community. So that it's just a little bit different than only sitting and, doing your work, which is of course definitely part of it. One must do that, but the whole creative process arises collectively. And the generation that grew up immediately after the genocide of Jewish people in Europe, and we were being in a communal setting with so many survivors, at the same time that Black people are fighting for civil rights on the public stage, those two things coming together also profoundly impacted me. As you know, if your community is vulnerable, that impacts you. It's it's not charity, and it's something. It's survival, it's resiliency, it's trying to take in history, all of these different things. Ceremony happens in a transformed space, even if it's something as simple as lighting a candle. But more than that, because of theater, we're always creating sets for storytelling. I'm a storyteller. So there was always, it just was always part of everything I did from the time I was 7 years old. My real focus came at a point when I was, late 50s, when I was losing my leg capacity. I eventually got a hip replacement. But then now I'm just really old and I can't do what I used to be able to do. And so I was very physical performer. And so especially the last year, I started switching into acrylic art and really blowing that up. I got really inspired, for instance, by hearing that Chinese kids had wings for social distancing, and this is a completely new medium, right? So now I'm trying to figure out how to use this medium, because I also teach kids. I kind of experimenting with things that I can do. Even in my painting, I'm a very narrative painter. I can never just paint paint. There's always some story going on. You know, you invite people to draw on a theme. For instance, like the kites, the kids wanted kites, and we have them draw what they draw, and then we create a landscape for it so they can be part of the painting, even as we sort of design it. That's what we did in Palestine a lot. And I guess I'd been doing that for a while too. It was probably 10 years into leading delegations. I realized that it was time for me to move smaller and to make a different kind of contribution to the communities. In the beginning, it made sense because almost no Americans knew the story of Palestine, and others of us who were involved in this, we had a goal of increasing in sort of seeding different communities around the country to have firsthand experience, witness. But after about 10 years of that, and it really grew, and Palestinians were leading these delegations, and the whole thing evolved, and there was a lot of on the ground leadership. I wanted to bring the art aspect of it. In societies where there's violence all around, it's really hard to sustain public art. We need creativity and resilience, opportunities for creativity and resiliency, that the imagination one needs to resist colonialism and all the violence and racism and everything that comes with it, and the corporate thievery, requires people to be able to experience joy, opportunities to be expressive and to feel agency, and to begin to build that power, that self-power and collective power. Especially collective projects can bring people together and to create something, and then that serves as a mirror that's a witness. Yes, we can do this, si se puede, and things begin to evolve and build and grow. It's very building an organic process that is not just the mural. The mural is, or the public art, it's a kind of gateway back and forth. It's a portal that creates other things. So it's critical. When people have agency over their own story, and there's an intergenerational storytelling to be had, that is a way. It's like a sacred tablet, a sacred tablet, where you're preserving sacred stories, whether it's a wall of martyrs, or it's a vision of what could be, or a vision of just daily life, the beauty of daily life. It's uplifting, draws the world that we want to see, or gives witness to the world that remains hidden from view. You can't be what you can't see. You know, if you're not seeing yourself reflected in the world, it makes one feel very passive. The things can be sort of done to you, upon you, but art can fill a community with tremendous agency. I know this from my own community. This is what I've learned from my own community, and it helped me see it in other communities. I learned how to see it in other communities. I went to Standing Rock. Naturally, there was a Jewish shtetl in Standing Rock. and all these activists in support of one Lakota elder and family. See this, be this community of solidarity to First People of Turtle Island, and to see my own community growing into this deep respect and understanding of how to be in solidarity, caretaking against so many odds of sacred symbols, and what the stories that those sacred symbols represent, and that people can tell about them. Yeah, it's critical. to preserving the great wisdom traditions of the earth.
Well, as a teenager, at the time, things that inspired me at the time when I was doing my art was, of course, coming from an element of punk rock music. These bands that were like questioning aspects of social justice. Growing up, I started getting really involved in Native resistance consciousness. At age 17, I ended up going to a place called Big Mountain, Arizona, and that's what really inspired me to really do the social political work within like indigenous concepts or perspectives, into the work that I was painting. At the time, I felt when I started learning from the Dene Navajo peoples and the struggles that were happening there as a young man, they were teaching us to like more than anything go back to your own community and really reinforce what's happening there. As well as the Zapatista struggle in '94 when they uprose, that really inspired us to come back to our own communities and really like reshape our communities. And at the time, they told us that don't pick up guns or arms like they had to do. Pick up your own weapon, and that meant art, that meant poetry, that meant music, that meant aspects of teatro, if it was, or other forms of expression to address the social, political, or community issues that were happening. I started like really focusing on what was happening around my own community, and that's in El Sereno. Identity politics that were going on at the time were really important to really address. So my artwork started kind of really focusing on identity politics as well as social, political, land issues that were happening among indigenous peoples. And then within Zapatistas, they always told us and showed us that, we want a world where many worlds fit, and that aspect and that concept really opened up a whole other perspective to what we were doing in communities. So by educating, using art as an educational tool, I think that really allowed us to expand more as a humanistic perspective, and because humanity's at stake now more than our own communities, right? It's a bigger picture to address, and art and painting and murals are used in a way that can really help our community be educated. It's really important that we use art to educate in many forms of what's around them and what's happening around them, because no one else can speak their voice, and art is used as a voice for the voice of the voiceless, in that sense, reinforce self-determination. We're part of that Chicano Indígena Encuentro, and we came back charged, like to really shape our communities back and to use music or art as a form of a weapon to expose truth. Now what I'm doing is using muralism as a form of oral tradition, that we have to start trying to preserve our histories and our oral traditional history stories through muralism. And I've been working with the Tongva elder as well as Kuya Nation the elders for permission, and as well as sharing with them what I'm drawing before I even put it into the context of an image. And I think it's really, really important to document our struggles and histories through our family histories as well through it. Like in the Tongva murals that I've been doing in Pitzer, actually preserve my grandmother in there as well. So it's really important that we bring our own history as well as our surrounding histories, and then more than anything to preserve an ancient history or oral historical basis of our land base, because the more you don't have connection to the land, the more they have control over the land. And if there's ancestors that have fought for us in that way, and then we're not fighting for that land base, then I think it's really like we're defeated in the sense that we don't have connection and land inheritance, our humble inheritance that has been passed down, especially or through the song, through art, and through music or through oral traditions in that way. Because um, more than anything, if you want to know about a culture, look into the art, and that's how you find and learn about the culture. If you want to, as well as the song, as well as the storytelling, and as well as our oral traditional stories that have been passed down from generation to generation.
My name is Luis Genaro Garcia, and currently I'm a professor of art education at Sacramento State. But prior to that, I was teaching art at the high school that I graduated from, which is Jefferson High School in South Central Los Angeles. And so I taught in that community for 14 years. Got me into art was graffiti. And so in middle school and in high school, I got into this idea of tagging. And, you know, that's where I started learning my understanding of elements, my understanding of aesthetics. After 14 years of being a high school teacher and teaching uh, in a socially conscious way through art to develop students' understanding of the community that they live in, I started teaching them about how to use art to creatively to challenge the systemic issues of racism, class, and gender that exists in their own society. So a lot of the work that I've done is research-based, meaning that I look at historical content, um, number one, of the space where I'm going to be working in, number two, of the images that I'm going to be using, and whether or not they relate to the communities that are going to be passing through them. And so it's research based. And then I think, okay, how can I teach the pass buyer that's just looking at this? Because a lot of the times when we look at murals or look at artwork, wherever it may be, we look at it and we have our own interpretation. And so I think it's important to somewhere, it either by it being a plaque or some sort of like little description, we should tell a short narrative of what this public art image is about. And so as an artist, I always want to use what I know to develop the knowledge of other art students to whoever is helping me with this work that I'm also teaching them at the same time. With that said, I'm going to focus on one particular piece, which is um, a mural that I did at Thomas Jefferson High School with a group of 6 students. So these are students that developed their knowledge of art and their skills by taking 3 to 4 of my classes. And so the end product, which I always call a service learning project, or if you might know it as a senior project, is that we actually go out outside the classroom and develop a project that's going to either enhance a community in a way where it's going to create dialogue, it's going to provide some art in this space, because we know that in marginalized communities, there's not a lot of art that exists that relates to these communities that engage with it. And so that was one of the things that we sort of focused on this image. And so the image is really about telling the history of South Central and how Jefferson High School was a hub during the jazz era. Jefferson High School had the very first African-American music teacher, whose name was Samuel Brown. And Samuel Brown taught many of the artists of the jazz era. So Jefferson High School became this hub of jazz artists and musicians that were being taught by Samuel Brown, who himself attended Jefferson High School as well. This mural does reference, again, the 1940s jazz era of Central Avenue. And then it references the time when students and parents organized against the city because they wanted to take over Jefferson High School. And so it references the 40s, and then it references the early 2010s when that was happening. So I think murals, you know, when people can relate to them, it brings them a sense of belonging. Um, and so I think, you know, when I first did this mural at Jefferson High School, a lot of former alumni, like from like as far as the 60s and 70s, were coming in to see the mural and saying, hey, you know, this mural really captures a history of the jazz era. And then current students were relating to it because, hey, you know, this is really capturing what we did against the city of Los Angeles when they were trying to take over the school. Because the two different images are like, one's coming from the right side towards the school, which is in the center. And then the reference on the left side is referencing the historic part. And that's sort of coming to the center as well. And so it's these two generations, right, coming to the school and kind of highlighting that this is what Jefferson High School is about. And, you know, it's the fact that you're able to find a sense of, or develop a sense of belonging, a sense of place, a sense of community to not only Latinos, but African Americans that have known South Central in different ways, but it also teaches them about the then and now, right? And not only is it done by alumni, by students that went to that school, but it's done by students that also live in that area. There's a sense of agency, right? If you want to improve your community, then this is one way that you could do it. The stories of people of color should be told by people of color that have experienced those stories. You have to think about intergenerational audiences like elementary students, middle school students, high school students, elders, and even our ancestors. Murals, I think, always need to be understood as a story. And I don't think everyone understands that in particular. You know, and so I think it's always important to understand the story that's being told. And so I think it's particularly important because it gives us the opportunity to, number one, teach, number two, learn, number three, to use that knowledge that we've just developed to develop on our own and to encourage us to think differently. Is that preserves our education, that preserves our intergenerational knowledge, right? That's a cultural preservation, is that sometimes we need to understand how our culture has remained resilient despite this idea of systemic racism that has continually oppressed communities of color. Our culture has been preserved through the very resilience that we use to push back against these systems of oppression.